Hello, and welcome to Everybody Eats, a Washington Wizards podcast on the Blue Wire Network. My name is Varun Shankar. I'm the Wizards reporter for the Washington Post. On this week's show, I had on Ben Golliver for the Washington Post. We talked about Cam Whitmore and everything going on with him over the last couple days and answered some reader mailbag questions. Great conversations about the future of the Wizards. It's always great to get Ben's perspective. Someone outside of the Wizards media sphere and someone who can give more of a national perspective on some of these things. Before that, if you like the show, please like, rate, review, share, and subscribe wherever you watch or listen. Let's get to the conversation with Ben right now. Joining me now on the Everybody Eats podcast is Washington Post NBA writer Ben Golliver. How are you, Ben?
Doing very well. Great to be back. How are you?
Doing great. I'm shaved a little bit, so I got the Cam Spencer rocking now,
Yeah.
Trying to,
Well, the headlines of your story are getting more dire, so I was worried.
Oh my God.
I didn't know what kind of condition you would be in, but I think as the losing streak started to mount, I know they got one in there. They got a W in there not too long ago, but how are you holding up?
Listen, you just try and make the job as interesting as possible day after day. Sometimes there are things that pop up that make it a little bit more interesting than the run-of-the-mill loss, and that's what we had in, Saturday's loss to the Atlanta Hawks. Cam Whitmore does not play. After the game, Brian Keefe comes out and I think gives a pretty strong statement, especially considering what Keefe has said previously. This is probably the strongest thing I've heard him say about one of his players. Keefe basically says that Cam Whitmore, who was benched that game, has not played up to the Wizard standards. And has not been up to the Wizard standards. He says it's more in-game stuff. And so I went back and I looked at some of the stuff from that game, and you could see some of the lower effort moments for Whitmore pop up, and it's been a turbulent season for him overall. There have been moments where Keefe has dropped his minutes, and when you ask Keefe about those in those games, he's mostly said we wanted to get a look at different guys. But I thought that this was a particularly notable instance because of how vehement Keefe was in his statement.
Well, looking at it from the outside perspective, one thing we know in the NBA is this doesn't happen if it's a matter of playing well or playing poorly, right? If a guy's just missing shots, you're not going to hear a coach talk like this. It's absolutely a matter of playing hard or playing not hard, right? When you're talking about standards, discipline, expectations, those kinds of things, it's always just, is this guy doing the little things? Is he, a positive member of the culture? Is he, pulling his slack, in the group dynamic? And so I don't think you need to read too much between the lines there. When you look at Cam Whitmore's overall body of work here in Washington, I guess, where are you at in terms of expectations? Because I know there was some excitement, during the offseason. It feels like a second draft player, the guy who had a lot of hype. He slipped on draft night. Now you're kind of getting a flyer on him. I wouldn't say it's been the cleanest acclimation overall, correct?
No, it has not been. And, Whitmore came into DC with some pretty well-established questions about his shot selection, his passing, his off-ball defense, sometimes his overall compete level. And you've seen a lot of those same things pop up, and it's one of the reasons that he has not been particularly effective, even though some of the things he does on the basketball court are unreal to watch. Some of the dunks are extremely flashy, and some of the mid-air adjustments he's able to make are extremely impressive. And, just getting to some of the numbers here, he's got a 26th percentile effective field goal percentage among forwards, 21st percentile in defensive rebounding rate. The Wizards are 6.5 points per 100 possessions when he plays compared to when he sits. He is not the only player on the Wizards who makes mistakes, even effort-based mistakes. There are moments in games where you could see a player get caught sleeping for a second, right? That's just the nature of being a young player, and
they're dead last in defense, right? I mean, there's mistakes happening, right?
Absolutely, poor communication. There's all these things, right? I think Whitmore probably makes more of the easily avoidable mistakes than a lot of the other players, whether it's taking contested shots when there's an easy passing outlet available. Not an easy passing outlet, but an available passing outlet. Missing box outs, poor hustle in transition. And he doesn't outweigh those enough with his positive play. And I think that's where you kind of get to Keefe's decision to sit him down for that game, give him maybe a mental reset. use playing time as a motivating tool in a way that Keefe has done before. I mean, 2 years ago when he was an interim coach, he benched Jordan Poole for a portion of that season and then brought him back into the starting lineup, and it really did work out. I mean, the year after last season, Jordan was a lot better, and I think that, he still has his warts as a player, but I think day in, day out, he was a much improved player. And so maybe something like that can happen for Whitmore. There's a lot of season left, but I mean, we're getting into like really crucial time for him in his career. He's extension eligible after the season, and now you're starting to get questions about his long term future in the NBA.
Look, I think it feels to me it's like a wake up call, right? And in his defense, he's coming from a situation in Houston where he wasn't getting the minutes he wanted, but they're winning a lot of basketball games. And so you just kind of have to eat that quietly if you're a player in his spot, right? You just kind of have to go through the motions and hope you get a chance. You come to Washington, you have to make the most of this opportunity. This is a second chance for Whitmore, right? I mean, he needs to really make a stronger first impression in his career than he has. He hasn't done a ton in the NBA through 3 seasons. When I look at just his overall, production, negative assists to turnovers, poor 3-point shooter. You mentioned some of the efficiency on offense, challenging shot selection. You have to ask the question, is he playing for himself? Is he playing for the team, right? And in a lot of situations, doing the little things, hustling back in transition, rebounding, moving the basketball, moving off of the basketball, right? Like you want to see all those things, especially if you're a young player who's unproven. And, it could be a situation where he comes in as a very highly talented player, in college and coming into the NBA. And so maybe he's struggling to adjust mentally to like what's really being asked of him. But now's the time to do it. To me, it makes a lot of sense with this wake up call because the Wizards have a ton of problems, right? One problem can't be guys aren't playing hard. That should just be the absolute, baseline. You look right down the list. You got a number of players on this team that I would categorize so far as disappointments, but they have to at least be trying. If they're not trying, somebody else can try. And I think, in their place. And I think that's really what this message is like, you're replaceable. We don't need you. We're going to lose games potentially with or without you. So try to make the most of your opportunity, get out there, do the little things, show that you're a team player. And this could go the right direction. If it keeps going like it's going right now, like you said, the question, it starts to be a ticking clock in terms of how long he's still going to be in the NBA.
And for the Wizards, you don't have much tied up in Cam Whitmore, right? You traded 2 second-round picks for him. It's not like there's a ton of investment here right now.
No, it's a flyer.
So, exactly, it's a flyer. It's a second contract or a second team, second draft player. On the other side, when you're trying to establish culture, I've seen a lot of people, when Brian Keefe talks about standards, it's easy to kind of point to, they're a 319 team. What standards do they have? And I get that, but when the Wizards talk about standards, they're not talking about results a lot of the time. They're talking about process. And when you have such a young team, a team where you don't have an identity yet, you don't have a very inbuilt culture yet. I think it's something they're still trying to develop. That's what they're talking about when they talk about the standard, and that's where it comes to playing hard, being in the right spot, being attentive, calling out switches, communicating, passing the ball, sharing the ball, playing the way that the team wants to play, which is playing good defense, forcing turnovers, getting back in transition, and then sharing the ball from there to find open shots and easy shots for each other, multiple ball handlers, this egalitarian approach, right? You cannot, at this stage of the rebuild, have players who consistently don't do that and then not let that go unpunished, right? And so that's where the decision to sit down Whitmore for a game, it's one of the things that I think as a coaching staff, like it's a very fair thing to do, to say, hey, listen, we have standards here. If you're not going to meet them, you're not going to play for a game.
Well, especially when so many guys are out, right? Like, hasn't that been an issue too? It's like, this is the opportunity. I mean, that's kind of the other way to frame it to Whitmore or to any player in his situation. Like, look, we need everybody doing even more right now because half the team is out with injuries. So we don't have any margin for error here, even when we're fully healthy, let alone right now. And so if you're not bringing it when half the team is injured, when you're in a losing streak, when you're still trying to make your name in the NBA, when are you going to bring it? And I do think there's going to be some people who will defend Whitmore by saying what you were saying, which is, oh, come on, the Wizards have no structure. What do they possibly mean about standards? Look,
that doesn't get better by rewarding players who play without that structure, right?
Exactly, and you have to start somewhere. If you're Washington, and if you're Whitmore, this is your chance. You have to make the most of it. You can't blame outside factors. You can't blame this or that. Look, if you're playing amazing and for some reason, Brian Keefe is overlooking you, okay, then there could be a little bit of, frustration. But that's not the case. He still needs to prove a lot more on the court. And I do hope that this serves as a wake-up call because there's some talent there. I mean, there was a reason why it was a first-round pick, and there was a reason why Wizards fans were excited when the trade happened. But to me, this is way more on Whitmore making the most of this chance than it is about the Wizards properly supporting him or however you want to frame that. I mean, I think that it's reasonable to put a spotlight on him. And I also think the benefit for Keefe is that if you do make an example of someone who's not holding up to the standard, you're sending a message to every single other player on that team. Like, I'm going to do the same thing to you if you slack as well, right? And so the only way you can have standards is if you enforce them.
Absolutely. With Whitmore, I hope he figures it out because I think the fully realized version of Cam Whitmore could be a really fun player. Someone who can get to the basket, finish, draw the defense's attention, and then kick out to shooters. That's an extremely valuable trait, right? That paint penetration is the number one thing that every team is looking for on offense. On defense, he's got requisite size and athleticism to be a multi-positional defender. He is someone who has good anticipation. I think some of the best moments he's had are with Keefe using him like a cornerback or a free safety where he's able to read the play on the backside and get some steals. And, that off-ball attentiveness is something where I think he could be pretty impactful. I also think he could, because of his athleticism and explosiveness, I think he's someone who could be a pretty decent wing rim defender. Someone, Alex Sarr gets switched onto the perimeter. Who's the low man? He's got to be there, and he can impact the play in a way that not a lot of players with his size are going to be able to. So there is a really interesting player. Think about what he could do as a cutter, right? And that was something that he did really well. Villanova saw it at points early on in the season with the Wizards, less so of late. I think that that's something, those are all areas where he could be really dynamic and someone who can be a really positive player on the court. That just hasn't been the case so far.
Yeah, hypothetical Whitmore sounds great. The
Yeah.
reality, and I think, with your videotape that you pulled together, it was just a different player than what we're thinking about, right? And so again, hope that's a wake up call. Hope that he takes the message the right way, and he comes out and plays much harder in big minutes because they have minutes to fill. So I don't know. It seems to me like this is the last thing that he should be involved with at this stage of his career. It's like we should be saying like, he's the kind of guy who wants to play 48 minutes a night. He never wants to come off the court. He wants to, win every sprint in practice. Those kinds of things about a player with this much to prove. And again, it goes back to the idea of, it's a challenging spot to be in when you're playing for a losing team. You have to have the right mental approach to it. And, he's coming from a winning college program, like you described, coming from a winning situation in Houston. You have to take ownership of, making the best of your days if you're a player in Whitmore's position or really anyone on this roster, right? Moping gets you absolutely nowhere.
Absolutely. I have nothing else to say about the Cam Whitmore thing for right now. We'll see what it looks like on Friday against Cleveland if he re-enters the rotation, what that looks like, how long his leash is. But for right now, unless you have anything to add, I think we can move on to the rest of this.
Oh, I hope he gets a real shot, when he comes back, because you want to see if the message stuck or not. And if it didn't, you got to sit back down.
Okay. We have a bunch of mailbag questions to get to. Before that, I wanted to quickly run through. Tim Bontemps and I last week did a draft of the Wizards' young players and future picks moving forward. And I wanted to see if you had any major thoughts. I'm just going to read out our draft board. First was a 2026 first-round pick.
Correct.
Alex Sarr.
Okay.
Keyshawn George. The 2027 first-round pick.
Okay.
The swap with the Phoenix Suns in 2026. Which looks a little less valuable now because they're playing so well, but they got a lot of season left. Trey Johnson, Bilal Coulibaly, and then the 2028 first-round pick. Does anything stand out to you there?
I don't know if you're going to love my answer. I don't know if the Wizards fans are going to love my answers. I feel like the 27 pick and the 28 pick need to be up higher.
Okay.
Both of them. I like where you're going, though, with the 26 pick being the most valuable just because that class is so good and because they are tracking towards a really, really high pick. I don't think there's any question. Even if the Wizards were to fall to 5 would probably be their worst right now. I think the 5th pick is going to wind up being a better player, a better prospect, a more valuable prospect than Alex Sarr. So I think you made the right call there. it's a really good draft, right?
Hmm.
I don't even think that's like controversial or hot
Big
take.
Kingston Fleming guy.
Yeah. When you're looking at those future picks, though, I mean, if things continue as they're going, I thought we were going to be seeing more progress from the Wizards this season. I thought this
Hmm.
was going to be a year, not like a turn the corner year, but like, hey, they look more competent on defense, right? It's not just like a layup parade every single night. Um, that hasn't been the case, unfortunately, right? So, and you start to look, well, what veteran players do they have to kind of potentially ever push for a play-in tournament appearance these next couple of years? Well, that's not the direction they're going. They're getting more and more flexible with their salary cap, so that potentially some of these guys who are playing well for them right now as veterans are going to be expiring contracts off the books, right? So I think you're probably underrating the 27 pick and maybe even the 28 pick a little bit in this exercise.
Hmm. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. All right, let's get to the mailbag. Questions have been slightly edited for clarity. Waste Lifeguard 7513 asks, what would the Wizards front office do if the team misses again on a top 3 pick in this year's draft? Do you think they continue to prioritize a high pick at the expense of wins for another season, or would they try something like the Rockets or Raptors and start to try to build a winning team with the pieces they have? I'll start with this. My read has always been that regardless of what this year's pick looks like for the Wizards, next year is not going to be quite as aggressive a tank season as the last couple years have been. I don't think that they're going to use the cap space that they have this year with CJ McCollum coming off the books, Chris Middleton coming off the books. I don't think that's going to be used to speed up this rebuild and sign free agents. That's not the read I have right now. That can change between now and then. I think that the Wizards might try and nab some other teams' bad money in exchange for future first round picks. It's something they've loved to do so far. I think it's something that they'll continue to explore. I do think that they view next season as a hey, let's see what this core actually is with no handcuffs on us because of this protected pick situation with the New York Knicks pick, top 8 protected. It's done after this season. And so, what does a core of Alex Sarr, Keyshawn George, Trey Johnson, Bilal Coulibaly, Bob Carrington, and whoever they draft with this top pick look like? The Rockets and Raptors comparisons are interesting, but I think they fall a little bit flat for me just because their top guys, Scotty Barnes and Alperen Sengun, are so much better than anyone Washington has right now. I think like for Washington to see that happen next season would require another major step from some of the guys that have already taken pretty major steps in Sarr and George, or this year's draft pick to just hit in a way that is a little unexpected, or unless they assuming they're out of the top 3.
The Rockets example is really interesting because they sort of hit and then took the shortcut trade with Kevin Durant to really
Mm-hmm.
jump up the board, or even made he's probably referring to like the Fred Van Vliet signings like that summer where they really invested some money. I think it's important to remember they went a number of years really bad. I think people forget how long that timeline was for the Rockets. 3 to 4 seasons where they were playing the draft game and really slowly making very little progress and kind of lost in the wilderness, right? So I'm not sure the Wizards are to that point yet, right? Like that would probably come the following summer, not this coming summer, but the next summer, where you would start to get itchy and wonder, hey, should we fast track this thing a little bit more? I think the good news is that we saw a team like Houston or a team like Detroit be really, really, really bad for a number of years. When they find the right player, the turnaround winds up being pretty quick, right? Like Shengun's probably the pivot player. You bring in Ahmed Thompson. Now everything's kind of going back in the right direction. With Detroit, it was obviously Cade and then getting Cade healthy. And you could throw in some Durant and some of these other guys. But you need to have that centerpiece foundational player. And so if I'm Washington, and this is not the message most people want to hear, I just keep doing this until I have the centerpiece foundational player, because history says trades and history says free agent signings is not really the way you're going to get that type of guy if you're the Washington Wizards, right? So to me, it seems like the draft is their path. You don't necessarily have to be this bad next year, right, to still be in the mix for a good pick. You're naturally going to expect some improvement because you have so many young guys who are theoretically getting better. But
Theoretically.
yeah, well, there's been some progress,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
You
fair.
would probably know better than I would, but they don't have the centerpiece player, so I think you just
No.
have to keep rolling the dice in the lottery. That's how I look at it.
So I kind of disagree here, honestly. With Houston, I just looked it up. They had 3 really bad seasons. This
Yeah.
is year 3 for the Wizards as far as being extremely bad. I don't know if you can. really tear this thing down for another season, I don't think you need to be. There's a question about this later, so we'll get to that later. But I don't think that. I don't think that they can continuously rely on the hope of getting someone in the lottery to be their savior, just because of how the NBA has devalued the efficacy of tanking, right? Like, there's not as much of a difference now between being the second worst team in the league and being the seventh worst team in the league. There's a difference, but there's not as big of a difference. And so I think for the Wizards, it is hard to get that player outside of the draft, that centerpiece player. But it's not impossible. We've seen a lot of teams, like the Indiana Pacers got Halliburton in a trade. The Knicks got Brunson in free agency. The Cavaliers got Donovan Mitchell in a trade. And so the easiest path is obviously you land a top 3 pick, you take Darren Peterson, Cam Boozer, AJ DeBanza, and you're off to the races. But I think that you can't just continuously hope on that, because like at some point, like you string this out one more year, now you got to pay Sar. You got to pay Koulibaly after the season, most likely.
Right. Well, here's the counter argument is that you spent all these years trying to get Beal's contract off your books, Poole's contract off your books, McCollum's contract off your books. You're ready to go. It's a clean sheet. Now you go and make some investments in players like the Houston example, like when they got Van Vliet or Dylan Brooks, right? What if Houston's young players weren't ready to win at the moment they made those moves, right?
Yeah.
Then you've just clogged your books back up and you're not significantly better. You're not pathetic. You're not the last place team. But if Houston's young players hadn't come along and been ready to play major roles in kind of boosting things up, those veteran additions that they made would have, been pointless, and it would have kind of like kept them in that treadmill of mediocrity where you've kind of spent your money, but you're not good enough to really compete, right? So I think Houston is a success story because some of their draft picks did work and they made smart kind of placeholder free agency signings that put them in a position to accelerate, right? If your draft picks aren't ready and you're only going to make placeholder type moves in free agency, you're still going to be really bad, right? And maybe you're just bored of being this horrible, but it's like you move heaven and earth to get off all this money just to go spend money on mediocre players in free agency. I don't know if that's necessarily a solution either. I don't think there's an easy path either way. I guess that's my conclusion. But me personally, I'm dragging out as long as I can until I get somebody like Darren Peterson.
I think that's tempting, but I just I don't know how much patience you can ask for from a fan base and ownership group. It gets really hard to watch year after year after year of this.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And I don't know. I just don't know that you could do this forever, even if it means that you do a consolidation trade. And you can getting stars in free agency, or not in free agency, in the trade market is difficult, but it's not impossible.
Well, that's another path is you have a lot of these, I don't know the exact term you want to call them, but chronically injured, quote unquote, stars who are like in their mid-20s who are probably ready for a second chapter,
Sure.
Right? So you could call that Zion Williamson, John Morant, Trae Young, LaMelo Ball. I mean, the list goes on. To me, what you're describing, where you kind of make some targeted free agency signings and you just bolster your roster a little bit, I actually like that plan better than gambling and just throwing all your faith into a Zion, all your faith into like a John Morant, and just hoping that talking yourself into a change of scenery is going to make it okay, because those guys might have problems with their organizations in various ways, but the underlying problem really is they can't stay healthy, right? And so to take on a real, a well-known player who's in and out of the lineup all the time, just so that you have somebody to help sell tickets, somebody to get the fan base more excited, kind of go that route. To me, that feels like the biggest shortcut, and it's the kind of thing that would really kind of undo some of the work they've tried to do these last couple of seasons. What do you think?
Agreed. I think if you make that bet, you better make it on the right player. I don't think those 4 guys are the right player for the reasons that you talked about. But I do think that the Mitchell example is really instructive to me, in part because I think there's some real comparisons between Sarr and Mobley. There's no Garland equivalent here, but I think there's intriguing pieces who can kind of function as in that tier of player, maybe obviously a little bit lower as of right now. But Who is that player coming up? We don't know yet, obviously. That's going to depend on what the next few years look like. I'm not advocating that this upcoming summer that the Wizards should sign their version of Fred Van Vliet or Dillon Brooks. I don't think that's what they're going to do. But I do think that this upcoming season, and you know what, let's just move on to the next question because this kind of gets us there. Where are the Wizards in their rebuild? MCS asks, when is the first year you can see the Wizards competing for a play-in spot? And then I think in a similar vein, Quick Work 263 asks, when does the pressure start to mount on Brian Keefe or on Dawkins and Winger for that matter to see some forward progress on the court? So I think that you don't need to
Lack of patience. They're getting impatient. You're right. The natives are restless.
next year's going to be year 4 though, right? How often do you
Yeah.
get to year 4 to rebuild without showing any kind of progress and results? Even if you grant the fact that the Wizards this current group inherited a really bad situation because Beal had the no trade clause, Porzingis had the opt-in, so you weren't able to get this traditional star returns for them in a way that obviously OKC was able to get with Paul George and Russell Westbrook, or Houston was able to get for Harden, right? And so, but at some point, you have to see some kind of tangible results. And if these
Yeah.
guys, the players that they've invested in, Sar looks, what does a core of Alex Sarr in year 3, Bilal Coulibaly, whatever he is by that point in year 4, Keyshawn George in year 3, and then this rookie that would be in year 1, what does that look like next year? Trey Johnson in year 2, and what does that core look like? I don't think you need to be in the play-in. I don't think you need to be in the playoffs. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. But you got to win a little bit more than the last couple of years. You got to show that. I don't think you can be a team that is actively searching for the worst possible record in the league. Does that make sense? Even if that means you win 29 games.
Well, to me, what does that team look like? It is totally dependent on who that number 1 pick is, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's the number 1 pick or the 5th pick, that could be a big difference. So you said it was year 4 of the rebuild or year 44? What are we coming up on?
If you're going by the 50 win mark, you're getting close.
So you have to, if you zoom out a little bit here, I understand the impatience 100% because, literally if you've been following this franchise for your whole life, you've got only a couple moments where you can really say, hey, it felt like we were in the mix where we really mattered. And that is just endlessly frustrating, right? But I don't want to sell false hope. I mean, I think that they're probably a couple seasons away from being in the play-in tournament mix at this point, given how leveraged they are on the young guys, and given that none of the young guys, to me, are really popping this season in terms of driving wins. It feels like CJ McCollum or Chris Middleton's hitting the game-winning shots in the games they actually win down the stretch. That's not exactly what I was expecting from this group. I thought it would be more Keyshawn George. I thought it would be more Alex Sarr. You win your matchups, once or twice a week, and you're going to stack a few wins, right? So still waiting for that to develop. And I do think that in terms of when does the hot seat stuff come into play, I think, you got to look at Brian Keefe here. You don't get to have the worst defense in the NBA for 2-3 seasons in a row and survive. That's what NBA history says. You could have the most patient organization, the most understanding owner. You could have fans that have been beaten down. They've seen it all. They're used to losing, all that kind of stuff. But that's just one of those golden rules where if there's not ever improvement on that end, where, beyond just absolutely abysmal, then usually teams will make a change. Almost always teams will make a change in that spot. I don't know. This is a little bit more lighthearted. I feel like it's getting dire. One fun thing that I've had, and maybe you can join me in this season, I've had a really fun time seeing, can the Oklahoma City Thunder have a higher point differential or net rating positive than the Wizards have negative? It's a really good race, Varun. I don't know if you want to work this into some of your game columns or not, but obviously the Thunder are on pace right now to be the greatest regular season team of all time. They're on pace to have the greatest, point differential margin of victory of all time. And the Wizards, it's pretty close. I want to say it's like plus 15 to plus 15, right? Or minus 15 for the Wizards right now. It feels like it's going to be a race that goes right down to the wire. What do you think?
So the Wizards are at minus 15.86 right now per stat head. Let's see what OKC is 16.17.
Oh, okay. So right now OKC is
right
leading. Now. But yeah, you're the anti-Thunder.
So if we're looking at charting out the next couple seasons for the Wizards, right? I think if you use next season as a evaluation season with no restrictions, you have nothing to worry about with regards to pick protections, right? Let's say that team, I think to be a respectable and like a reasonably good outcome. You can't finish in the bottom three of defense. You can't, net rating wise, like you need to be somewhere between the 17th and like 23rd best team in the league. Maybe even a little bit lower than that, but like 17th to 25th, right? And let's say that gets you to like 28 wins, which is more than they've won the last couple seasons and more they're going to win this season. I think, and if you see, let's say that Sarr continues to be the player that he looks like he's going to be, where, I don't know, I don't want to put like a name to it, but yeah, I'll put a name to it. Why not? Like somewhere between Miles Turner, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Evan Mobley, let's say, right? Like somewhere between that trio of players. Keyshawn George takes another step forward. Maybe he's not like an elite player, but he is someone who is a very useful starting wing in the NBA. Bilal Coulibaly, we have not seen enough from. I have not seen enough this year that I can really give an idea of what he might be. The number one pick you have, or not number one pick, the first round pick you have in 2026, it looks reasonably good. I don't know if that player looks like a star, but looks reasonably intriguing, right? That constitutes a successful 2026-2027 season. Now, the year after that, depending on what they do as far as acquiring bad contracts and what they have as far as cap space, I still think that they will have some level of flexibility to make some moves. And then I think the year after that, so 27-28, is the first year that you look at this team and you say, there's real expectations here. Like, you cannot, like, you are entering a season where you need to be, maybe not a preferred playoff team, but you need to be a playing team. And that's where the real expectations start to get kicked in. So I think the first year where I think play-in should be the expectation is 27-28.
That sounds reasonable to me. I mean, I do think the Houston example comes back in here on the idea of like fortifying the defense, right? I mean, that really was the idea with Van Vliet, but also especially Brooks. And I think if you're trying to track here in the shorter term, because people are going to say, well, I don't want to dream of the play-in tournament 3 years from now. That's a little bit tough to swallow for some people. But if you think more in the shorter term, I guess that's what you want to see on the shopping list this upcoming summer, maybe even at the trade deadline, but more likely this summer, the idea of like, okay, if there actually is cap flexibility now, make trades where those guys are going to have a clear impact on your defense, right? At positions of need. You've got Sarr back there. But it's like target practice every single night.
Yeah.
Everybody going after him, right? So, shore up the perimeter defense, shore up the on-ball defense, make a signing or a trade or two that are going to clearly improve on that end, right?
You're saying this not for this upcoming offseason, but next offseason.
No, I'm saying like come July, they're going to have the flexibility.
Oh, see,
right?
I don't think they'll do that though. I don't think they'll do that. I think they want to leave the pathway open. They don't want to close off pathways to playing time for their young players.
Right. Well, then they're going to have to play better because I think you're going to get to next July and you're going to face a crossroads moment. Personally, from the outside perspective, I don't see a huge need to rush this. Like I said, I would keep playing the lottery game and the development, the young guys game, but they have to show progress at some point. Otherwise, they're going to lose people, right? Like, and especially on the defensive end, are there any of their young players that they have on the current roster who you feel like have significant untapped potential defensively who can be part of the solution? Because if not, they're going to need to look for somebody who can help out as soon as this summer, right?
I would say Alex Sarr. I'm pretty firm on that. I think that his rim protection looks extremely real. His ability to switch onto the perimeter is extremely real. This is someone who, even from year one to year two, has made jumps as a defender, and I think is someone who... It would not surprise me if Alex Sarr makes multiple all-defensive teams throughout his career. Like I'm
totally
fair
high
on that. Yeah.
Bilal
Coulibaly, I think, is a good wing defender. Probably not as good as some Wizards fans think he is. Particularly as an off-ball defender, he has a tendency to get fall asleep a little bit at times, not fight over screens as well as he does when he's guarding the ball. But I do think that his length, his athleticism, his motor. I mean, I don't know if you got a chance to watch Wizards Bucks, but like he was really good against Giannis. That was not just Wizards fans clinging to anything. He was legitimately good against a player who he has severe physical mismatches against, and when he gets put against a smaller guard, he can really, really harass him. So I think that's someone where those are two guys. Keyshawn George is someone who I think has probably taken a little bit of a step back defensively from where he was in the second half of last season. The fouling is still an issue. He's a little bit worse as far as, staying in front of people. But I still think that that's someone who I expect to be at least 7 out of 10 defender moving forward. After that,
Right. And so I'm loving the optimism on all three of those guys. I hope that's, it continues to trend that way. I think you can make some investments next summer. It doesn't have to be huge, huge spending to get those guys some help and actually really take a step. Because I think right now it's like you have to kind of walk before you can run. These guys are crawling defensively. I mean, they're barely making any sort of progress. And I think your best young defenders will look better with some veteran guys around them
absolutely.
who are just kind of competent and just placeholder type guys. So
Because the
um,
vets they have now, CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton, for all they do and all the right spots that they know to be in, they cannot move well enough to be solid
correct.
defenders at this
Well,
day
and go back to like Poole and Kuzma, right?
No,
I mean,
that's a
this is
non-starter.
yeah, this has sort of been an issue, right? And so I think that there's room where you don't have to get too cute with making sure every single minute goes to the young players, right? Like there's probably room to make some targeted additions. It'll be a more watchable product. You're going to be more competitive if you take a step forward on the defensive end. And if these young guys continue to pop, they'll be the priority. There's no question about it. So I don't know if you call that the Rockets model exactly, because the Rockets brought those guys in to play and to
Yeah.
lead and to sort of be central
They needed
pieces.
adults in the room, too.
Yeah. Yeah. And, well, the Wizards might need a few
Fair.
adults as
Fair.
well. Yeah.
Especially after CJ and Chris are gone. Well, so I'm curious if the Wizards, rather than trying to find those players in free agency and probably paying a little bit of a premium in the way that the Rockets did, and the Rockets were able to do a lot of good things. Van Vliet was still a very reliable player for them last season. Brooks was part of the Kevin Durant deal, so there was, all of those players ended up being useful. Are the Wizards able to find that player, specifically those players who can be impactful on the defensive end, and get first round picks in exchange because those players are not playing to a value commensurate to the amount of money they're being paid? So, like, I can't think of a good name off the top of my head. I don't know his contract situation right now, but like, what does Jeremy Grant's future with Portland look like? And if you bring him in, what does he look like? Not an elite player by any stretch, but someone who's a really competent NBA level defender, right? And so, is that someone where Portland says, "Hey, you can have him, and you can have a protected first round pick somewhere down the line"?
Yeah, I don't know if they view him as that negative an asset in Portland. I think that you can have Jeremy Grant, if you want to make a good
Sure.
offer, but I'm not sure he's like quite that toxic, in terms of like you're picking up other assets. Just because his contract's not as long as it used to be. I mean, they've been trying, he's been in rumors for years, it
Yeah.
feels like, and never moved because no one really wants to do it. Um, I think that because the versatile defense is such a coveted skill set right now, it's actually pretty hard to find like negative value guys who've been paid off their defense. Like it's just easier to overrate and overpay guys who are offense first players, it feels like. And,
Yeah.
and, the Wizards are probably, less, catastrophic on that end right now. So yeah, it's difficult to try to construct a trade, I think, in the short term where you're getting defensive upgrades while also getting extra draft picks. But I do think there has to be a shift in mentality here at some point, right? Like the cap space should not just be for renting and accumulating second round picks year after year after year forever. Like eventually you're going into a spend mode, right? And this summer it might feel a little early to some people, but at the same time, like if this season continues as it's been going, I hear your point on the pressure ramping up and maybe potentially changing perspective a little bit.
Well, so okay, but you're saying that you want them to continue playing the lottery game
Well,
until
it's
they're
not
able
my
to get
job,
rid.
like I'm just looking from the outside. Like, if I was in their spot, I would be feeling the heat. I mean, listen to
Sure.
all your emailers, or your question
Yeah,
askers. I mean,
yeah.
they're fed up. They want to see some results. And you can only watch the 30th defense for so many years, night in and night out. It will drive you crazy, Varun. It's coming. You're doing a great job of maintaining your sanity, but if they don't make some progress here at some point, it will drive you absolutely loco. So I think well, I shouldn't say only path because there's always exceptions, but their best path to a transformational player is going to be the top of the draft, right? And
I agree.
so I would stick with that for indefinitely, really, if it was up to me, but it's not my team. So if I was actually the GM, I would have a different perspective because I would be worried about my job. I'd be worried about, creating a culture and all those kinds of things.
So to recap, just my prediction on what they will do over the next couple years, and I am absolutely going to revisit this if I end up being right. I don't think that they make any particularly aggressive moves in free agency this season. I think they might bring in someone on a bad contract. I think next season, if things go well, you will see the Wizards take a moderate step up on defense. Some of these younger players become a little less young. They're more time in the system. They're more time in NBA strength conditioning, all that stuff. The year after that, 27-28 is the first year where you start to see expectations, and I think in the offseason before that, you will see the Wizards, depending on how next season goes, make some moves where you can see them being a little bit more short-term focused. So that's my prediction right now. All right, next question. Kind of similar vibes. What are the odds that Brian Keefe is the head coach of the next competitive Wizards team? Ben, I'll let you start here.
I mean, I would say better chances that he's not than he is.
I think that's fair.
I mean, you're laying out, kind of a 3-year plan here. This is not year one for him. The defense has been atrocious, and I'm kind of harping on that. To me, that's the decision. That's the pivot point, right? He either gets this defense better, or it's going to be, very tricky for him going forward. So I don't see a ton of improvement just miraculously happening overnight. If they do take a slower approach like you're describing, that puts him in a tricky spot. And to me, it's not really the losses this year that has me down. It's sort of like how they're happening, right? Again, what's driving the wins? Seems like the older players in the late game situations. What's driving the losses? An atrocious defense and not as much progress from some of these individual young players as maybe we thought was happening like in the first week of the season the last time we talked. So that would make me a little bit nervous, if I was Brian Keefe, because you either need wins or you need hope, right? You got to sell one of those two things. And right now it's easier to sell hope than wins, but both are looking a little tricky.
Yeah, I'd say it's not zero, but it is less likely than not. In an ideal world, I think the Wizards would love for Brian Keefe to become the coach of the next competitive team, similar to what OKC's done with Mark Daigneault. But it almost never works out that cleanly, right? The Rockets went from Steven Silas to Ime Udoka. Pistons went from Monty Williams to JB Bickerstaff, and then, no, they still have JB Bickerstaff, I take that back. The process Sixers went from Brett Brown to Doc Rivers to Nick Nurse. But I will say for Keefe, the growth from some of the young players looks a little less staggering than it did early on in the season, in part because Keyshawn George has not been the same level of player he was at the beginning of the season. He's been nagged here by a couple injuries. He looks a little passive on some nights, but I think most nights you're still seeing someone who can shoot well from three, play with the ball in his hands, defend multiple positions. How well is maybe a question, but defend multiple positions and, pass the ball pretty well. I think Sarr's growth has been massive, and I think that when he comes back from this adductor injury, which could be as soon as Friday against the Cavaliers, might be a little bit longer, I think that you're going to see him kind of pick up right where he left off sooner rather than later and become someone that we talk about as one of the better young players in the league. I guess this brings me to a broader Brian Keefe point in that I understand why Wizards fans are so frustrated with him, but what did people expect? They're a tanking team. Of course they're going to suck, right? And maybe it's been a little bit worse than you expect, but I think Sarr and George's improvements are at least somewhat attributable to him. And this is a first-time head coach, but someone whose background is heavily influenced by player development and someone who has integral roles in the player development of some of the best players in the league right now. Kevin Durant raves about Brian Keefe. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander raves about Brian Keefe. Those two Thunder MVPs were players that Brian Keefe worked with extensively while he was an assistant coach there. And I think that some of those same principles you're seeing with some of the improvements that you're seeing with some of the Wizards' young guys now. And I think that Keefe is going to be judged less on... Well, he's going to be judged on where the defense ends up in a year. I guess that's fair. But this season, it's hard for me to hold him accountable for too much. He's not blameless in how the season has started, but at the same time, they're playing so many young players, and they're either playing young players or veterans who are way past their primes, especially on defense. I just don't know I don't know what he can do.
To me, the standard is if you're playing other really bad teams or other tanking teams, those need to be competitive games, right? Those can't feel like pickup games. And so if he's getting to that standard, then I don't necessarily know that he needs a ton of over-the-top criticism, because that feels like a reasonable expectation. There's probably 10 teams in the league the Wizards are going to take the court against have no shot, just purely
Mhm.
based on youth and talent, right? So I'm not going to worry about those games. It's more like when you play Brooklyn, right? You play Utah, those types of teams, you should be trying to hold your own a little bit. You should be pushing as good as you're getting, right? And that's it's more of a feel thing rather than just necessarily a results thing. You brought up his Thunder past. It's an interesting example because Mark Dagnall did kind of see the Thunder all the way through really tough times, all the way to the mountaintop, right? And I think as that process was unfolding, he never, I mean, it was sort of a linear straight line up. So he never really faced the, major heat. But there was a
Mhm.
couple of years where it was pretty dark in Oklahoma City. And what was clear was that the front office, especially, Sam Presti, I wouldn't necessarily call it blind faith because he's a very thoughtful guy, but they really, really believe that Mark Dagnall was the right personality and the right person to carry a team through this. And they never wavered after that one playoff loss. They were knocked out kind of early against Dallas, and people thought, oh, that's a little bit of a disappointment. But there was never any real smoke about, oh, Dagnall's going to lose his job, right? And I think it's, Dagnall is not this flashy guy, by any stretch, but he has a charisma to him. And he has like just a very deep commitment to the sport and to his job, to creating a culture and all those kinds of things that is evident, like, as soon as you meet him, as soon as you're in a press conference room with him, like everybody can kind of feel it. And I guess, it's not necessarily maybe a fair comparison, unfair comparison. Do you get the sense that Brian Keefe is in that same type of a vision from the Wizards front office or, from those around him? Because, it's really tricky. You listed off all those coaches who didn't keep their jobs as they were going through the rebuilding process towards the teams getting better. And I feel like you almost have to be that exceptional personality, that's exceptional leader to be able to make it to the finish line, to do what the questioner is asking, which is, lead a team, back when they're winning again. Does Brian Keefe strike you as that type of guy?
I think he can be, but I don't know that I can evaluate NBA coaches well enough to say so for sure. I mean, I think there's a chance. I'm not going to rule it out. I think Brian Keefe has had his resume has enough on it where I say, yeah, this is something that can be, that can happen moving forward. But the results have not been there. I will say that largely it looks like the Wizards have been able to, keep things together during this rebuild. I think that what he did with Jordan Poole 2 years ago and kind of revitalizing Poole's career has been impressive. I think what's happened with Sarr's improvement has been impressive. I think I really like the way that Keefe approaches his role as someone who says, our job is to get better every single day, little by little by little. And my job, specifically as a head coach, is to create an environment where people feel like they're supported to get better. I'm not in the practices. I can't say whether that's true day after day after day, but I do think that Keefe's players seem to like him. They seem to respect him. He is tough on them when he needs to be, it seems. He is fair with them. And at the end of the day, it might just, like, I don't know that we can evaluate Brian Keefe right now because he's being put in a situation where the best thing to evaluate a coach on, wins and losses, is inverted almost for the Wizards.
Well, there's a lot of those coaches you mentioned who got fired were in that same
True,
situation where they had a
absolutely.
hand tied behind their back because the team wasn't trying to win in a big way, and then eventually, someone has to go.
One thing I'll say though,
Coaching is
some of
a
those
tough profession,
coaches,
man.
it's brutal. I understand why Jeff Van Gundy is so defensive of coaches all the time on his
Yeah.
broadcasts. But I'm trying to. I know that when the Pistons went from Monty Williams to Bickerstaff, they switched front offices in that time too. I don't remember what the process Sixers looked like, but I don't think that Hinkie was the one who decided to move on from Brett Brown, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't remember for Phoenix, but I can check on that now.
Yeah, I mean, there no two situations are going to be the same. I mean, it does still
Mhm.
feel like the Wizards front office has a lot of runway, right?
Yeah,
In
I
terms
tend to
of,
agree.
yeah.
So the
So
Rockets example is illustrative because Steven Silas and Raphael Stone came in at the same time.
right. And Steven Silas, there was a lot of rumors that he didn't necessarily have the same kind of positive relationships with his players that Brian Keefe has, as you're describing. I guess there was some smoke before he wound up getting let go. I'm not sure we've seen that yet with the Wizards. Possibly something to keep an eye on as a long losing
Absolutely.
season unfolds. So I think, for Brian Keefe, it's like there are worse situations to be in. It's not like there's ultimatums this year. He's got to hit X, Y, and Z,
Mhm.
or he's gone. I wouldn't say, although there's pressure from your listeners, I wouldn't say it's like overwhelming pressure nationally about, what's his job going to look like. So, ultimately, to me, it comes down to his relationship with that front office. If they still have the belief and the trust that he's going to be able to kind of have them see through, but if you don't start showing progress, and that was one thing about the Thunder, like it was basically 2 years and then
Yeah.
boom, there was progress. If you don't start moving this thing in the right direction, I think that the talk is going to pick up.
One thing I find interesting is the difference between the way that someone like Keefe is being viewed and someone like Will Hardy, who has had seasons where he's won more than Keefe has, but I think that's also sometimes been to the detriment of Utah's long-term prognosis, and they've extended him and they've made it a priority to keep him around, and I think he's viewed as one of the rising young coaches. What do you see from someone like Hardy with that national perspective that makes you think like, oh, this is a dude?
Well, they gave him a really long-term contract and they gave him some real money because when they hired him, he was like one of the most coveted, young coaches,
Mm-hmm.
like you're describing. So I think that gives him a level of juice as just a figure within the organization that a lot of other coaches, especially like first-time coaches, don't necessarily have. I mean, you probably saw the clips going around this week where he's just like chewing his guys out in the huddle. Most coaches don't get to talk to their players like that. That's the way a coach communicates when he knows he's on solid ground, right? It's not that he's yelling at them because he's panicking. He's yelling at them because he's the coach and there's a good chance he's going to be there longer than the players are,
Sure.
right? And so I think that can actually be a healthy dynamic, especially for a rebuilding organization where you don't have to worry about, guys having, players having more power than the coach or somebody trying to
Mm-hmm.
get him fired or whatever. I mean, it's clear the chain of command there. I think one thing you could say about those Jazz teams is they've had some really interesting offenses, and as you've described, they've had some real success. Ahead of schedule, where like
Mm-hmm.
Lowry Markkanen's in the All Star mix. These guys are winning all the games. Every trade deadline, it feels like they have to sell off veterans because they have to lose more to kind of keep their draft picks, right? So he has been a good soldier in terms of just continuing to coach and hammer away at things, even as the front office is kind of like pulling talent away from him to just make sure the team, he kind of gets the high level players that they want in the draft. So I would look at what Will Hardy's done in Utah and say he's got a better resume in terms of positive impact than maybe somebody like Brian Keefe, just based on the offensive success and they've been relevant. It's not it's not 3-19 ugly where 30th in defense, and he's had standards. He's got into it with some veteran players. He's got into it with some young players where he's had to bench them, and come back around the next season and say, okay, you get a starting role again. Let's see how you do it. George, their point guard, kind of went through that whole process as well. So I feel like he's still on firm ground there, and I think that most people would look at Utah's losing and say, well, that's just because it's directed by the front office as opposed to something that he's not doing as a coach. Whereas I think with Washington, maybe it's a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B, right? I mean, it's obviously directed, but it's the results are the results.
I don't think Brian Keefe is massively helping the Wizards overachieve right now. I don't think that's the case. I don't know that he's making them underachieve relative to what they were expected to do. I think like they're probably a little bit worse than they want to be at this point in the year. But again, this is a team that entered the season trying to lose it. So I guess it's just hard for me to evaluate where he might be falling short, other than to say, how are the young guys coming along? And that remains the number one
Well,
question.
let's say it this way. I mean, what does the season look like at the end of the year where Brian Keefe is back next year? Like, is there a win total? Is it, an offense defense ranking in a certain category?
I would be
Is it,
surprised if he's not back next year.
oh, so they go 3-79 and he's back.
If it's quite that bad, I think it might be an issue. But like if they finish similar to how they did last year, where they're
Yeah.
15 to 20 wins and your bottom three in offense and defense and net rating, I would be pretty surprised if he wasn't brought back next year.
Well, in that case, let's hear him take a page out of Will Hardy's book and start screaming at some people to play harder on defense. Let's get some of these huddle videos going. Let's like crank up the attitude here. If he's on that firm of ground, why not? Rub some people the wrong way. Let's create some positive friction here.
He can get pretty demonstrative during games, and the few times where
Good.
I get to see sit courtside,
Yeah.
Brian Keefe can get pretty heated. So
Do you want to give us any, color? Is there things that you can say, or is it explicit? What are we talking here?
you know what? Nothing comes to mind right now, but I'm going to Memphis next week or something like that, and Memphis is one of the places where you get to see it courtside, I will keep an eye out for things that Keefe says in particular. All right, we're
So when
almost out
Zach
of
Edey
time.
gets his 20th rebound, you're going to let us know what
Yes, you
what
know,
Brian Keefe has to say. Can't wait.
I remember game against Dallas this season or last season. Dallas, another place where you could sit courtside, and Keefe, after what he just like he like leans back so far sometimes, just like, oh, what are we doing here? And you could see the tolls taken out on him in games at times. All right, last question. Any ad 8788 asks, imagine you're able to add skill points to players like in 2K. You have 20 points to spend on a players on the Wizards roster. They can be used on any number of players and at whatever amounts per skill. Who would you spend the points on? What skill area if you were trying to accelerate the growth of this team? Accelerate the growth of this team most expeditiously.
I'm not a video game expert, but I would spend all of my points on Alex Sarr. I would max him out as a 3-point shooter, and I don't know if dog is a category or heart or whatever that would be. But I'm maxing out his dog and I'm maxing out his 3-point shooting because, like, I think we've both been pretty complimentary of his defensive ceiling over the course of this episode. And if he's just like a 40% three, like if he's Brooke Lopez as a shooter and he has Draymond Green's motor, I mean,
Yeah,
okay.
that's really good.
Now
That's really good.
you're out of all these kinds of conversations that we've been having over the half an hour. I mean, the franchise is basically fixed, right? Or at least it's much further along the pipeline. So I think, unfortunately, some of the other younger players, like, they've been disappointed to the degree, not that they're lost causes, but I just wouldn't want to waste these very valuable upgrade points on them. I'm throwing everything in the Alex Sarr basket. How would you approach it?
Okay, so I actually went away from Alex Sarr entirely. I
Oh,
said
okay.
20 points below Koulibaly's 3-point shooting.
Okay.
That level of athleticism, that ability to, like, the burst that he has, the defense that he has, combined with being like, I mean, if you had 20 points, I'm sure that he's, at that point would be considered one of the better shooters in the league.
Right.
Is that a more athletic Mikal Bridges? Is that like OG Anunoby with a little more ball handling? I mean,
Right.
you can get pretty irresponsible discussing what Bilal Coulibaly looks like with an elite 3-point shot.
So you go for him, but you don't pump up George into like the next great wing.
See, that's another potential option. I thought both for Trey Johnson and Keyshawn George, if I could just add like 10 points each to their agility and then 10 to speed, just make them like supercharged athletes a little bit more,
Yeah.
that would also be a pretty intriguing combination.
By the way, to the emailer, this is why people get into steroid scandals because you can't actually just do this and add points. So the tempting shortcut is, how can I get bigger, faster, stronger? Let's just start injecting things into my biceps. So maybe we're hoping that doesn't actually happen. Everybody's doing it the right way, the
There we
natural
go.
way.
There we go. All right. On that note, Ben Golliver, where can people find your work?
Washington Post, man, you know that.
There we go. All right. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
Have a good one.